The world knew Wilson Andrews as the man you didn't cross in Lagos. At just 30, he had built one of the most feared and respected luxury empires in Nigeria, dealing in rare diamonds, golds, and high-end jewelry, with clients spanning monarchs, foreign dignitaries, and underground tycoons. His face had graced the covers of African business titans and Forbes West Africa, but not once had anyone dared to call him kind. He was cold, calculated, and breathtakingly brilliant. Women admired him, men feared him, his rivals hated him. But no one, absolutely no one, understood him. And that was how he liked it. What they didn't know, what he didn't allow anyone to see, was the boy who never healed. The boy whose mother had died too young, too painfully, too quietly. The woman who'd once kissed his forehead and whispered, "No matter what happens, I'll never leave you." But she did. Breast cancer took her, and the man she left him with, Wilson's father, buried himself in boardrooms and mistresses. Wilson grew up in a mansion that echoed with silence, a home full of staff, gold, and imported chandeliers. But no warmth, no hugs, no bedtime stories. Just schedules, just money, just loneliness. By 22, he had inherited a chunk of his father's mining business. By 25, he'd multiplied it. And by 30, he had everything except the one thing he realized he desperately needed: legacy. Not money, not property, but blood, a child, someone of his own. Not because he longed to be a father in the conventional sense. He didn't fantasize about lullabies or school drop-offs, but because there had to be someone to continue what he had built when he was gone. Someone to inherit the power, the name, the empire, and maybe, just maybe, break the cycle of lovelessness he had endured. But he didn't want marriage. He couldn't stand the thought of emotional obligation, the risks, the vulnerability. Women wanted his name, his wallet, or his empire, not him. He wasn't going to allow anyone into his world through seduction or sympathy. So he came up with a plan: hire a surrogate, no emotional strings, no messy entanglements. Just a clean, discreet arrangement. He had the best lawyers in the country draw up a watertight contract. The surrogate would be vetted, medically cleared, and paid handsomely. No contact with the father. No further involvement after delivery. The interviews were brutal. Held in a mirrored glass room of his private office complex in Ikoyi, each woman came in and answered the same cold questions. Why do you want to do this? What would you do if offered more money to terminate the pregnancy? What's your understanding of confidentiality? He wasn't even in the room. He watched from the adjoining suite through the two-way mirror, his tall frame leaning forward as each woman paraded through, all painted faces and desperate smiles. Most of them were chasing the money. A few faked altruism, but he could smell lies the way others smelled cheap perfume. And then she came in. Emily Okoye, 24, soft-spoken, underdressed, tired but dignified. She looked like someone who hadn't slept, like someone who'd spent nights in hospital waiting rooms praying for good news. She wasn't there to impress. She was there because she had no choice. Why are you doing this? Evelyn, his head of HR, asked her. There was a long pause. Emily's eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. She swallowed her pride and answered, voice barely above a whisper. My mom has breast cancer. She's dying. We've tried everything. I just need the money for her surgery. I'm not doing this because I want to carry a stranger's child. I'm doing this because if I don't, I'll lose the only family I have. Wilson froze. His jaw clenched. His heart, usually a fortress, shuddered. He tapped on the glass, twice. It was the signal Evelyn had been waiting for. Emily was chosen. Within 48 hours, Wilson had transferred enough money to move Emily's mother to one of the top private hospitals in Nigeria. She was scheduled for a mastectomy and treatment under a world-class oncologist flown in from Dubai. No expenses spared. Emily never knew who paid. She was simply told by the agency that the sponsor, a wealthy anonymous client, was fulfilling his side of the contract in advance. Her relief was instant. The joy in her eyes when the doctors confirmed the surgery date was more than payment. It was something Wilson hadn't seen in years. Gratitude that came from the soul. The IVF was successful in one cycle. She was pregnant. But then, tragedy struck. 3 weeks after the procedure, her mother took a sudden turn. Internal complications, an infection, then death. Wilson received the call at midnight. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. And the next morning, when he sent someone to check on Emily, they told him she hadn't eaten in 3 days. Her room was a mess. She barely spoke. She didn't shower. She wouldn't talk to the therapist he had arranged. She was, in every way, collapsing. Wilson wasn't worried about breach of contract. He was worried she would miscarry. And worse, he felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Concern. Real, aching, human concern. That was when he made the second decision. "I want a house," he told Evelyn, "in the same estate, just beside her." "Sir?" She blinked. "I'm moving in beside her. I don't want her to know who I am. Not yet. I'll be her neighbor. Casual, friendly. I'll keep an eye on her personally." "Why?" His voice was rough. "Because I made her a promise. Without speaking it. She trusted me with her body. Her grief is my fault. If anything happens to her, or that child, I won't forgive myself." Within days, the house was ready. A fully furnished, minimalist home with no trace of luxury or power. Wilson stripped off his suits and Rolex watches. He wore polos and sneakers, drove a regular sedan. He became Wills, the charming bachelor who just moved in next door. He knocked on her door one sunny afternoon holding a basket of oranges. She opened it, startled to see someone her age, her eyes still rimmed red. "Yes?" "Hi," he said gently. "I just moved in next door. Thought I'd say hello." "Oh, okay. I'm Emily." "Wills," he smiled. "Nice to meet you." That was how it began. He watched her bloom slowly. He brought soup when she was sick, tea when she had cravings. He listened. Really listened. She spoke of her mother a lot, of loss, of loneliness. Wilson didn't say much, but he remembered everything she said. The more time he spent around her, the more he realized Emily was not like anyone he had ever met. She was strong, even in her sadness. Kind, even when the world had broken her. She had this way of smiling when she was in pain, like she didn't want to burden anyone. It undid something in him. He hadn't just made the right choice for a surrogate. He had made the right choice for his child. And without meaning to, he began to fall. Emily had never known comfort quite like this. It was unusual, almost surreal, how a man she had met only weeks ago could feel safer than anyone she had ever encountered. Since her mother's death, her world had been shrouded in grief and uncertainty. She was carrying a child for a faceless benefactor, had signed a contract that offered financial relief, but stripped her of emotional connection. Yet in the quiet corners of her days, there was him, Wills. He had appeared so casually in her life, like a gentle interruption. He lived next door and always showed up with thoughtful offerings, fruits, warm soup, herbal teas, or freshly baked bread he claimed to have made himself. And gradually, his presence began to anchor her. He never asked intrusive questions. He never forced a conversation. He simply made space for her in the silence. And for someone drowning in loss, that kind of presence was priceless. Emily found herself waiting for his knock each morning. She found herself smiling more, laughing again, albeit cautiously. She found herself healing, slowly but surely. To Wilson, the lie had begun as a shield, an effective means of monitoring her well-being without complications. But what had started as a calculated decision was now rapidly becoming something he could no longer control. Living beside her, watching her grieve and grow, had changed him. He had not expected the impact of her soft-spoken resilience, nor the quiet strength with which she carried both her sorrow and her unborn child. Each time she looked at him, with trust in her eyes, it pierced him. He had told himself it was for the child, that he was protecting his heir. But it was more than that now. He was drawn to her kindness, her thoughtfulness. her simplicity. She was nothing like the women he had known, and that made her unforgettable. But beneath the growing connection, there was a looming storm: the truth. Wilson was not just a concerned neighbor. He was the man who had arranged her surrogacy, the man responsible for both her relief and her betrayal. And the longer he delayed telling her, the heavier the guilt became. One evening, the power flickered out during a light rainstorm. Emily knocked on his door, a candle flickering in her hand. She looked vulnerable and quiet, wrapped in a thick cardigan. He welcomed her in without hesitation. They sat on his modest couch as rain pattered against the windows. He handed her a warm blanket and brewed tea over a portable gas flame. "I dislike storms," she said softly, her gaze distant. "Why?" he asked gently. "They remind me that we're never truly in control, that anything can change in an instant." He looked at her carefully, his voice low. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For what life has taken from you." She smiled faintly, but her eyes glistened. "You're always kind." He didn't know what to say to that. If only she knew the truth. If only she could see past the version of him she'd come to care for. That night after she left, he stood in the darkness of his own living room and stared at the wall for hours. He knew he had to tell her, but he also feared what he would lose. Their relationship deepened over the following days. She began to open up about her past. She spoke about growing up in Aba, about her mother's scent of lavender and lemon oil, about watching her mother fade away before her eyes. He listened, absorbing every detail, storing it like treasure. And sometimes she would ask about him, about his family, his past. He gave vague answers, carefully tailored half-truths. He told her his mother had passed away early and that he worked in consulting. She never pressed for more. Yet the distance between truth and trust began to strain inside him. He was falling in love with her, deeply, unexpectedly, and it terrified him. Then came the inevitable mistake. Emily had requested to visit a local market, her first real outing since the pregnancy began. She wanted fabric to sew comfortable maternity dresses. Wilson had insisted that his driver take her. The driver, unaware of the secrecy surrounding Wilson's identity, was friendly. Too friendly. On the way back, Emily, resting her head against the window, asked innocently, "Have you worked here long?" The driver smiled. "Oh yes, I've been with Mr. Andrews for over 6 years." She turned to him, confused. "Mr. Andrews?" "Yes, madam. Mr. Wilson Andrews. This is one of his properties. He doesn't usually stay in one place for long, but since you moved in next door, he's been here often." Emily froze. Her heartbeat quickened. Her vision blurred slightly, but she said nothing. She simply nodded, pretending not to understand the weight of what had just been said. She sat in silence the rest of the way home, her mind racing. And Wilson Andrews. The name she had seen in her surrogacy contract, the name that had offered her salvation and stolen her peace. She walked into her house like a ghost. Every conversation, every gesture, every touch replayed in her mind. His soft smile, his attentiveness, his silent compassion. All of it was built on deceit. She did not confront him. She did not scream. Instead, she packed a small bag with trembling hands. The contract had assured her she would have no relationship with the father of her child. She had been told it was a happily married couple, wealthy, private, and kind. She had comforted herself with that narrative, believing her child would be raised in love, even if not by her. But now, everything was a lie. Wilson Andrews was not a stranger. He was the man who paid for her womb, the man who had invaded her grief under false pretenses, the man who pretended to care, only to manipulate her trust. She left a letter on the counter. No anger, no blame, just quiet pain. And before sunrise, she was gone. Wilson had not known real panic in years. He had faced business collapses, government raids, and hostile takeovers without flinching. He had walked into negotiation rooms with billionaire deals on the line and come out victorious without breaking a sweat. But none of those moments prepared him for the chilling silence that greeted him when he stepped into Emily's apartment that morning. It began like every other day. He carried a simple breakfast tray, grilled plantains, herbal tea, and a note he had finally found the courage to finish. He had decided that today would be the day he told her everything, his name, the truth, the reason he had chosen her, why he had moved in next door, why her presence had become more necessary to him than anything else in the world. He rehearsed the words in his head with each step. He would speak gently, honestly. He would apologize without excuses. She would be upset, he knew that, but maybe, just maybe, she would forgive him in time. But when he knocked on her door, there was no response. He called her name. Still silence. He turned the knob. It opened easily. His eyes scanned the space, and instantly a cold sensation spread through his chest. Something was wrong. The apartment was too clean, too still. There were no signs of life, no dishes in the sink, no shoes by the door, no books on the sofa where she usually curled up to read. Everything was in order, almost unnaturally so. And then he saw it, a cream-colored envelope, addressed in handwriting he recognized instantly. Will's. He picked it up with hesitant hands and unfolded the paper inside. Will's, I trusted you. And maybe that was my mistake. I know now that you're Wilson Andrews. I know that you are not who you pretended to be. I don't hate you, but I cannot stay. This child was never supposed to be yours alone. I accepted this arrangement because I believed I was helping a family start one. I told myself I could bear the loss of this child because at least it would be loved. Now I don't know what to believe, and I cannot let myself be part of another lie. Please don't look for me. I need time to breathe. Emily. Wilson sat down slowly, the letter still trembling in his hand. The walls around him, walls he had always kept so high and so firm, seemed to close in all at once. She had left. And this time she had not run to escape poverty, or sorrow, or her past. She had run from him. He stood abruptly, heart racing. He began searching the apartment for any clue as to where she might have gone. The wardrobe was nearly empty. Her purse was missing. She had taken some clothes, toiletries, her mother's framed photo. He rushed back into his house and grabbed his phone. Yay! Get Evelyn, he barked into the receiver. Now! Within 15 minutes, Evelyn arrived, breathless. What happened? She's gone, he said, pacing across the floor, the letter now folded and clenched in his palm. She found out who I am. She left without telling anyone. Evelyn's face fell. We didn't expect it to happen this soon. How did she find out? The driver, he said bitterly. He mentioned my name. She connected the dots. What do you want me to do? Track her. Find out where she went. Pull any footage from the estate's exit gates. I want updates within the hour. Sir, if I may, perhaps she just needs space. Wilson turned sharply. She is carrying my child, Evelyn. She is alone and she is hurt. Space is not what she needs. She needs safety, and I need to know where she is. Evelyn nodded solemnly and left the room to make calls. By late afternoon, Wilson had exhausted every contact he could trust. Surveillance footage showed Emily leaving the estate just before dawn, wearing a hoodie and carrying a small bag. She had taken a taxi, paid in cash. No trace of the license plate, no mobile transactions. She had vanished. And she had done it carefully. She had wanted to disappear. The next few days passed in a fog. Wilson canceled meetings, ignored investor calls. His office sat silent while his mind reeled with memories. Her laughter, her quiet strength, the way she sat on his porch with a cup of tea and looked out at the world like she was trying to find her place in it. He felt unmoored. He had always known that what he was doing was risky. Lying to someone as sincere as Emily was never going to end cleanly, but he had convinced himself that the ends justified the means, that the child, their child, would be worth it, that perhaps she would forgive him once she saw the life he had built for them. Now she was gone, and for the first time in his life, Wilson felt powerless. A week later, his lawyer arrived. The legal team has reviewed the contract, the man said, placing a thick file on the table in Wilson's office. There's a complication. Wilson glanced up. What kind of complication? The contract was built on confidentiality and honesty, both of which are now in question. If Emily chooses to contest it, the court might consider it void. Wilson's eyes darkened. She agreed to carry my child. She signed. Yes, but she believed she was doing it for a couple, a stable, married family. That was the foundation of her consent. The words hit harder than they should have. She ran away with my child. She's still pregnant, the lawyer corrected gently. She hasn't broken any laws. But unless this matter is resolved quietly, there could be media exposure, legal action, even custody complications after the birth. Wilson stood, his posture rigid. What are my options? The lawyer hesitated. The cleanest legal route would be marriage. If she marries you, even temporarily, all disputes vanish. You'll have full paternity, and she will have protection under your estate. Marriage, Wilson repeated flatly. The word tasted like ash. Yes, a year of marriage would ensure legal standing and silence most questions. Wilson turned toward the window and stared out at the Lagos skyline. Somewhere out there, Emily was alone, hurt, pregnant, and convinced he had betrayed her. But he wasn't ready to give up. Not on her, not on their child, not on what they could still become if he could find her and if she would allow him back in. The cafe air had turned still, thick with unspoken emotions. Emily tried to hold her composure as she listened to Wilson's proposal. A marriage, an arrangement rooted in necessity, not romance. She had barely begun to process the idea when her vision started to blur. The sound of clinking cups and distant conversations became muffled. Her hands trembled. Wilson rose immediately. Emily? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The dizziness surged. The room spun. Her breath quickened, then stopped altogether. Then everything went black. The next thing she remembered was the sensation of warm light on her face and the sterile scent of antiseptic. Her eyelids were heavy, but she could hear low murmurs, shoes squeaking, someone adjusting a chair. Wilson was sitting beside her bed, still wearing the same navy shirt from earlier. His eyes were fixed on her pale face, the fatigue on his own now unmistakable. His hair was tousled, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and there was a stillness about him that felt uncharacteristically vulnerable. The moment her eyes fluttered open, his entire posture shifted. You're awake, he said, voice low with exhaustion and relief. Thank God. Emily blinked, disoriented. Her body felt heavy, and her throat was dry. What happened? You fainted, he replied softly. From stress, dehydration, exhaustion. The doctor said it was a warning. Your body is asking for rest. She winced, turning her face away. So what now? Are you going to put me on a plane back to Lagos? Keep me locked in one of your mansions until I give birth? Then take my child away? His eyes darkened, not in anger, but in pain. No, he said firmly. You are not a prisoner, and you are not a problem to be solved. She turned to look at him again, surprised by the clarity in his voice. You think I brought you here to trap you. But the truth is, Emily, I came here to listen and to tell you I was wrong. About everything. Her chest ached at his words. There was no arrogance in his tone, no control, just a man admitting his failure. I don't want to fight you, he added. Not now, not ever. I only want you to get better. Emily's lips trembled. She looked down at her hands, resting over her stomach. I'm sorry I ran away, she whispered. I should have stayed, but I was scared. I couldn't imagine handing my baby over like a transaction. I don't think I ever truly could. I wish I never signed that contract. Wilson leaned back in the chair, his expression raw. I wish I had listened to the psychologist. Her gaze lifted to him. Psychologist? Yes, he said. Before we finalized the surrogate selection, the psychologist reviewed your case. She said you weren't an ideal candidate, too emotionally invested, too compassionate. She thought you might develop an attachment, but I overruled her. Why? She asked, her voice small. He hesitated, then said, because I liked you. She blinked. You liked me? I watched all the interviews through the mirror, but yours stayed with me. You weren't performing. You were grieving, fighting. You didn't come to sell your body. You came to save your mother. There was something about that, about you. I couldn't forget it. Emily was quiet, absorbing every word. I thought, Wilson continued, if I had to choose someone to carry my child, I wanted at least to feel something toward the person. Respect, admiration, maybe even a little affection. A beat passed. You seem perfect to me. Her eyes clouded. But the contract, the lies. He sighed. My lawyer wanted to impress me. He knew I was becoming intrigued by you. He manipulated the backstory, told you what he thought I wanted to hear. I never read every line. I trusted him. And he fed me a fantasy so you'd be satisfied. Wilson looked down, ashamed. Yes. There was silence again, thick, emotional. Emily closed her eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time, she saw the man behind the empire. Not ruthless, not untouchable, but flawed, human, tired, trying. She whispered, what happens now? Wilson sat up straight. Now we start over, on your terms. If you agree to this marriage, not for my sake but for yours, we do it with full truth. No secrets, no pressure. Just an agreement to protect this child, and protect you. She looked at him closely. And what do you want out of it, Wilson? He hesitated again. A chance to make this right. And in that moment, for the first time, Emily believed him. The hospital room had quieted by evening. The doctor had confirmed that Emily and the baby were stable, and Wilson had stepped out to take a few urgent calls. When he returned, he found her sitting up in bed, her expression calm but resolute, her hands resting gently on her stomach. I've thought about what you said, she began softly. Wilson walked to the chair beside her and sat down, his gaze steady. And? I'll marry you, she said clearly. There was a pause and then his brow creased. What? Emily exhaled slowly. I'll marry you, but only on one condition. He leaned forward, intrigued and cautious. Go on. That's the only way you get to be in this child's life, she said. I'm not going to raise my baby feeling like I have to hide or fight for stability. Marriage is the only legal shield I have, the only way I can ensure I won't be pushed aside later. Wilson stared at her, caught off guard. I never asked for marriage. I know, she said, and I never asked to fall into this mess. But here we are. Her voice didn't carry spite, just the kind of quiet strength he had come to admire. She wasn't using the child as leverage. She was trying to reclaim some control over her future. He stood and began pacing slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. Marriage was never something I wanted, Emily. Not now, not ever. I'm aware, she replied, her tone clipped but controlled. But I won't raise my child alone, and I won't be a woman you check in on occasionally with bank transfers and bodyguards. I deserve more. This child deserves more. He stopped walking. Their eyes met. Wilson had always believed himself to be immovable when it came to commitment. Love was chaotic. Marriage was dangerous. But fatherhood, that was different. The very idea of missing his child's first steps, first words, first breath, it clawed at his chest. He had come too far to lose it all now. I'll agree, he said finally, voice low, to the marriage. Emily's expression didn't shift. She had expected him to cave, not from romance, but necessity. But, he added carefully, this must remain what it is, a contract, a year, nothing more. After that, we part ways and co-parent separately, peacefully. She nodded. Agreed. No intimacy, no pretenses. Boundaries, he confirmed. And truth, she added firmly. From now on, no more secrets. He nodded. Done. The silence that followed was thick with something neither of them wanted to name. Reluctance, but also relief. The private wedding took place 4 days later at a discreet courthouse in Lagos. No press, no celebration, no white dress. Emily wore a simple teal gown and flat sandals. Wilson wore a navy blue suit, nothing extravagant. The only people in attendance were Evelyn, 2 legal representatives, and a court registrar. The documents were signed, the photographs taken. The marriage was official. Wilson placed a delicate platinum band on her finger, one he had chosen himself. Not flashy, just elegant enough to mark the moment without overwhelming her. She accepted it silently, her fingers trembling slightly as the metal touched her skin. When it was over, they stood side by side outside the courthouse. 2 strangers, 2 parents, now legally bound. Returning to Lagos was another wave of reality. Evelyn had already prepared a press release to minimize rumors. Mr. Wilson Andrews, CEO of Andrews Company, has entered into a private civil marriage. The family requests privacy and will not be answering questions at this time. The photos would be carefully chosen, professional, distant, and vague. As expected, the media buzzed. Paparazzi circled his mansion gates. Social media speculated about the mysterious woman who had tamed Lagos's most feared bachelor. But Emily was never seen. Wilson made sure of it. She stayed inside, away from the madness. He moved her into his private estate, a quiet, expansive property in Banana Island. Not the main house, but a secluded guest wing with its own private entrance, kitchen, and sitting area. They lived together, but not as husband and wife. Their days were structured. Wilson worked long hours. Emily had prenatal checkups, daily walks by the garden, and evening appointments with a personal therapist. They ate dinner together sometimes, out of formality, not comfort. They spoke politely. They shared space, but not lives. One evening, after a tense dinner filled with nothing but cutlery, scraping porcelain, and the faint hum of a generator outside, Emily set her fork down. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. He looked up. "Regret what?" "This, us, the way this began." He studied her for a moment. "I regret not being honest from the start. I regret letting someone else speak for me. But do I regret you know?" Her eyes softened for a moment. "You confuse me, Wilson." He gave a small, tired smile. "I confused myself too." There was a beat of quiet between them, long enough to feel like a question left unanswered. "I'll never be the woman you need," she said. "I never asked you to be," he replied. "But you did choose me," she said gently, "and I still don't know why." He leaned back in his chair. "Because I needed this child, and I didn't want to feel like it came from nothing. I wanted to feel something for the woman carrying my child. You were real and kind, and you were doing it for love, not greed. That mattered to me." Emily looked down, her fingers gently brushing her baby bump. "And now?" "Now," he said, "I want to make sure that no matter what happens between us, our child never feels like they were a mistake." Her throat tightened. Because behind those words, carefully constructed, quietly spoken, was something that almost sounded like hope. The days passed slowly after the marriage, each one quiet but heavy, like the pause between 2 uncertain notes in a song not yet finished. Wilson and Emily lived in the same estate, in 2 very separate worlds. She had her own quarters, he had his. Their interactions were polite, almost sterile. Short conversations in the hallway, a nod over breakfast, a closed door after dinner. And yet, something had started to change. It was in the little things, the way Wilson lingered at the dining table a little longer after she excused herself, the way Emily would wait to hear the distant sound of his car pulling into the driveway before she allowed herself to fall asleep, the way their eyes sometimes met during dinner, and neither of them looked away quickly enough. The boundaries they had built so firmly were beginning to blur, not by force, but by quiet familiarity. One evening, Emily sat in the sunroom with her hands resting lightly on her belly, watching the rain trickle down the tall glass windows. She hadn't heard Wilson enter until he spoke gently from behind her. "You're up late." She turned, startled slightly. "Couldn't sleep." He nodded and walked to the shelf, pouring himself a glass of water. "I had a checkup today," she said suddenly, her voice softer than she expected. Wilson turned to face her. "Everything okay?" "Yes, baby's strong. Heartbeat is steady." He exhaled in quiet relief. "That's good to hear." There was a pause. She looked at him and smiled faintly. "You always look worried when I mention medical things." "I always am," he admitted. "It's the only thing I don't want to fail at." Emily studied him carefully. "You're not failing." He gave her a half smile. "Sometimes it feels like I am." It wasn't just Wilson's words that had softened. It was everything about him. He no longer stormed into the estate like a king returning from war. He arrived quietly, sat in the garden more often, sometimes with documents in his lap, other times with nothing but silence and a far-off stare. She would watch him from her balcony and wonder how a man so feared in Lagos could look so tired. And then, there was that night. Emily woke up with a sharp pain in her side. It wasn't excruciating, but it was persistent, deep and low, causing her breath to quicken. She tried to sit up but felt a rush of nausea and panic. It was past midnight. Her instinct told her not to disturb anyone, but fear overrode her pride. She reached for the estate phone and dialed the extension for Wilson's quarters. He picked up on the first ring. "Emily, I need help," she whispered. He was there in under 2 minutes. No security, no staff, just Wilson, barefoot, in a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, his face alert and his voice laced with concern. "What is it? What's wrong?" "I don't know," she said, her hands trembling slightly. "There's a pain here, on the left side." Without hesitation, he knelt beside her, checking her forehead, her breathing. "I'm calling the doctor." "No, please, it might be nothing," she insisted. "I'm not taking any chances." Within 20 minutes, their personal physician arrived. After an exam and a brief scan, the diagnosis was clear. A false contraction brought on by stress and tension. She would be fine, but only if she rested, mentally, physically, emotionally. When the doctor left, Emily sat in silence, curled under a blanket on the couch. Wilson stood nearby, his arms crossed. His eyes, though tired, stayed locked on her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For bothering you." "You're not a bother," he said quickly. "You never were." She looked at him, surprised. He exhaled deeply and moved to sit beside her. "This isn't what I expected, Emily. None of it. I thought I could separate myself from the process. From you. But I can't." Her heart pounded. "Then why did you choose me, knowing that?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then softly, "Because you reminded me of something I lost a long time ago. Kindness, purity. I don't know. Hope, maybe. My lawyer told me to choose someone easy, detached. But when I saw you sitting in that interview room, I knew I couldn't choose anyone else." She frowned. "But he lied to me." "I know. He wanted to please me. He saw how much I noticed you. He thought if he gave you a story that would appeal to your heart, you'd sign without question. I didn't know he'd done that until I reviewed the documents after you left." Her eyes stung. "And you would have never told me?" "I would have," he said, looking at her intently. "I was going to. That morning. I was coming to your door with the truth." Her lips parted in disbelief, then closed again. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "I should have protected you from that manipulation." The air between them thickened with emotion. Then she spoke, her voice trembling. "I don't think I can give this baby away, Wilson." He nodded. "I know." Tears welled in her eyes. "So what happens next?" He reached out, hesitant at first, and then gently placed a hand over hers. "We figure it out, together." From that night on, something shifted. They no longer avoided each other in the house. They ate together, by choice. They spoke in full sentences. They asked real questions. They listened. Wilson began canceling evening meetings just to be home in time for her cravings. Emily began to notice how he laughed differently when he was near her. Lower, more relaxed. He watched her belly grow with awe. She caught herself watching him, his hands, his profile, his quiet care. And in that space between obligation and emotion, longing began to bloom. The storm began gently that morning, clouds moving lazily across the Lagos sky, the air thick with humidity and the scent of an impending downpour. Emily sat on the edge of the couch in the nursery, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other tracing lazy circles on the soft fabric of the baby's cot. She had come to love the quiet moments most, when no one was watching, when she didn't have to be the calm, composed version of herself, when she didn't have to pretend this arrangement made sense. Wilson had been different lately, gentler, more present, more aware, and she found herself letting her guard down more than she expected. Some days he would walk into the room and ask how she was feeling without formality. Other times he would sit beside her in silence, listening to the baby's kicks with wonder in his eyes. It was in those moments when she saw the boy he used to be, the one who lost his mother too soon, who had grown up behind walls of power and pride, that her heart softened. She was beginning to see the man beneath the marble exterior. The baby arrived on a cool Thursday evening. The contractions came earlier than expected, but everything had already been prepared. Wilson rushed her to the private hospital in Ikoyi himself, ignoring every protocol, his hand wrapped tightly around hers in the back seat as she clenched her teeth against the pain. For the first time in months, Emily saw panic in his eyes. Not the panic of a man out of control, but the panic of a man afraid to lose what he finally realized he couldn't live without. The labor was long, almost 11 hours, and Wilson never left her side. He stood beside the hospital bed, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement, offering his hand every time the pain surged. The nurses commented softly, surprised by how involved he was, how quiet and focused. He didn't speak much, but his presence was immovable. When the baby's first cry echoed through the room, Wilson froze. The doctor held up the infant boy, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, wailing with fresh life. Emily collapsed back onto the bed, exhausted but tearful. Wilson took one look at the child and went completely still. He reached out as if afraid to touch him, then gently gathered the baby into his arms. His throat worked as he swallowed hard. His fingers trembled slightly as they traced the boy's cheek. "He looks like you," he whispered to Emily, voice raw. "But he's mine." Then, as if naming him gave the moment permanence, he said, "Nathaniel. His name is Nathaniel." Emily blinked at him. "Nathaniel?" He nodded slowly. "It was my grandfather's name, the only one who ever looked me in the eye when I cried." And just like that, the child had a name, a history, a place. The first few days after returning home were bathed in soft light. Wilson transformed overnight. He became completely and utterly enthralled with Nathaniel. He held the baby every chance he got, waking before sunrise just to watch him sleep. He installed a new wing of the estate for the nursery, complete with a temperature-controlled sleep unit, custom handmade wooden furniture flown in from Italy, and a rotating team of pediatric experts on call. But most of all, he gave gifts. Gold chains for Nathaniel, a ruby pendant necklace for Emily, a postnatal wellness spa set up in the house, a private lactation specialist, a handwritten letter addressed to her, thanking her for giving him the greatest gift of his life. At first, it moved her. She admired how tender he was with the baby, how protective, how attentive. He talked to Nathaniel like he had known him for years, cradling him with reverence and awe. But as the days turned into weeks, the gifts kept coming, and with them, something in Emily began to change. She began to feel invisible. Not deliberately, not cruelly, but quietly. The nurses called Wilson Sir and reported directly to him. The baby's schedules were organized by Evelyn's team, and Emily found herself constantly looped in instead of being consulted. Her presence was appreciated, yes, but increasingly it felt transactional, managed. She didn't voice it at first. She didn't want to seem ungrateful. But deep inside, something tightened every time she watched Wilson cradle their son and barely look in her direction. She started to feel like a vessel, like someone hired to deliver something precious and then step quietly aside, like a paid nanny with a wedding ring. One night she sat in the nursery, alone while Nathaniel slept. The house was quiet. Wilson had left for a late business meeting. A driver had offered to bring her dinner, and she declined. She looked down at her bare feet and whispered, "Why does this still feel like I don't belong here?" Tears filled her eyes. She had done everything right. She had carried the child, agreed to the marriage, sacrificed her pride, her plans, her peace, and yet now that Nathaniel was here, it felt like she was slowly fading into the background of a life that wasn't hers. It wasn't that Wilson didn't care. It was that he cared so much for the child. And she wasn't sure anymore if he still saw her. Later that evening, when Wilson returned, he found her in the nursery chair, rocking Nathaniel slowly, though the baby had already drifted off to sleep. "You're awake," he said softly, stepping inside. She nodded, eyes fixed on the child. "He has your mouth." Wilson smiled faintly. "You think so?" She didn't respond. He sat down across from her, watching the two of them in the dim light. After a while, she finally spoke. "Do you ever notice how everyone around here talks to you? But about me?" He blinked. "Emily. I'm his mother, Wilson," she said quietly. "Not the assistant, not the nanny, not a figure in the corner." "I know that. Do you?" There was a long pause. "I see you," he said, voice rough. "Every day. I thought I was showing appreciation. I thought the gifts would help." "They don't," she whispered. He sat back, rubbing his jaw, suddenly unsure of how he had gotten everything so wrong. "I didn't mean to make you feel secondary, but you did." Silence. "Emily," he said gently, "you're not a mistake, and you're not an accessory to this family. You are this family. I'm learning. I've never done this before." She nodded, but the pain in her eyes didn't soften. "I haven't either. But the difference is, I can't afford to disappear." And Wilson knew then that something had shifted again. Not in anger, but in need. Emily needed to be seen, not just thanked, not just honored, but chosen. As a woman, as a mother, as a partner. And he would have to decide if he was ready to do that. Emily had never been the kind of woman who raised her voice, but silence, prolonged, piercing silence, had a way of collecting like rain in a bucket. Eventually, it overflows. And that evening, it did. She stood in the master living room, Nathaniel cradled in her arms, her eyes fixed on Wilson like he was a stranger. Her voice was low, her tone steady, but each word landed with the sharpness of a blade. "I can't do this anymore." Wilson looked up from his tablet, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean this arrangement, this house, this life where I'm standing in the background while you build a kingdom around your son." He rose slowly, confusion etched across his face. "Emily, I'm not done," she said, her tone firmer now. "I have watched you love this child with a passion I didn't think possible. I've watched you build a world for him. You've surrounded him with wealth, security, the best care money can buy, and I'm grateful for that." Her voice wavered. "But where does that leave me?" Wilson froze. Emily continued, her eyes glistening. "Every time you speak about Nathaniel, you say my son, my child. Not once have I heard you say our child. Do you even realize that?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "You made me feel like a vessel, a carrier, a means to an end. And now that the child is here, I'm treated like the nurse who happens to live in the house." Her breathing grew shallow, emotion tightening in her chest. "Do you know how that feels?" Wilson stared at her, still saying nothing. That was what broke her. The silence. The absence of any defense, any apology, any attempt to fight for her. She shook her head slowly. "You won't even correct me. You won't say it's not true. You just..." Stand there. He finally began, but the words fell flat. Emily stepped back. That's what I thought. She turned and walked toward the hallway. Where are you going? His voice cracked. To pack a bag. You're leaving? I'm not running away, she said without turning. I'll make arrangements. You can still see Nathaniel. We'll co-parent like the contract said. But we don't need to be under the same roof for you to be a father. Wilson stood there like a man whose world had just split in half. He didn't try to stop her. He didn't beg. Maybe he couldn't. But inside, something collapsed. Emily left the next morning. She didn't wait for dawn. She quietly dressed Nathaniel, tucked a small suitcase under her arm, and walked out of the mansion as the security guards opened the gate with puzzled faces. Wilson watched from his bedroom window, the curtain slightly parted. He had spent the night in his office, unable to sleep. Her words played in his mind, on a loop, your child. Where does that leave me? We don't have to stay in the same house. Every sentence felt like a verdict. But it was the look in her eyes that haunted him most. Heartbreak buried beneath strength. A woman who had given everything and finally realized she was giving too much. The house felt empty that day. Painfully empty. Wilson returned from his meetings and instinctively glanced toward the nursery wing, only to remember she wasn't there. No baby sounds, no quiet humming, no light coming from her window at night. He poured himself a drink and sat on the couch in the silence, staring at nothing. It was worse than loneliness. It was absence. He had gotten used to the sound of Nathaniel's gentle cries, to the softness in Emily's voice as she spoke to their son, to the comfort of knowing they were just across the hallway when he returned home each day. And now that comfort was gone, and he had let it go without a fight. Evelyn came by 2 days later. She's moved into an apartment in Lecky, she reported, setting her bag down. Modest, but clean. Comfortable. The baby is fine. She's hired a part-time nanny. Wilson nodded without looking at her. She says you can visit anytime, as long as it's on a schedule. He gave a bitter laugh. A schedule. That's what I've become now. Evelyn hesitated. She doesn't hate you, Wilson. She shouldn't have to hate me to leave, he murmured. Why didn't you say something that night? She asked softly. Wilson leaned back in his chair, exhaustion in every line of his face. Because I didn't know how. I didn't know how to explain that I've never had a family to learn from. I thought building a world for Nathaniel would be enough. I didn't realize I was making her feel like a guest in her own life. He looked away. She deserved better. You still have a chance, Evelyn said. Wilson shook his head. She didn't ask me to fight. She asked me to see her, and I didn't. Not in time. Meanwhile, Emily sat on the edge of her new bed, rocking Nathaniel in her arms. The apartment was quiet. Smaller, yes, but peaceful. Still, she missed the sound of Wilson's footsteps on the marble floors. She missed how he would quietly place a hand on her back during her prenatal checkups. She missed the way he watched their son, like he couldn't believe he was real. But what she missed more was what could have been, if only he had chosen her as much as he had chosen the child. She looked down at Nathaniel's sleeping face, then whispered, I need to be more than someone who gave you life. I need to be someone who's allowed to live. Wilson Andrews had always believed power came from control. Control over time, over decisions, over people. It was how he had built his empire, how he maintained his reputation in the ruthless world of luxury trading. But sitting alone in the quiet of his house, no echo of laughter or gentle cries to fill the silence, he began to understand just how deeply control had cost him the things that mattered most. Yes, he missed them. Not as an abstract absence, not as a regretful memory. He missed Emily's voice drifting down the hallway in the mornings. He missed Nathaniel's gurgles, the way the baby curled his tiny hand around Wilson's finger like it was his anchor. He missed walking in through the front doors and knowing his world, his real world, was right there. And he had watched them leave, watched Emily close the door behind her and take their son as son, without once asking him to stop her. Because she shouldn't have had to. He spent the next few days doing something he rarely did, revisiting his past. He visited his mother's old grave, somewhere tucked in the highlands just outside Jos. The marble was weathered, the name barely visible now, but the memory struck with startling clarity. How she used to sing him to sleep. How she used to say, "No gift replaces presence, my son." Then he traveled to his father's old estate. It had long been abandoned, the paint peeling, the silence eerily familiar. This was where he had learned how to shut people out, how to love from a distance, how to protect himself through ambition. But now, staring at the emptiness he had inherited, Wilson knew he didn't want this to be his legacy. He didn't want Nathaniel growing up in a house where the warmth of a mother's presence was drowned by gold trimmings and power suits. He didn't want to be a father who built walls instead of homes. The first time he visited Emily and Nathaniel in their new apartment in Lekki, he came alone. No driver, no security, no luxury car. He carried a soft baby blanket he had bought himself, wrapped carefully in brown paper, and a small book of bedtime stories Emily once mentioned she loved as a child. When she opened the door, she was surprised to find him standing there without fanfare. No gifts, no flowers. Just Wilson in jeans and a navy shirt, with tired eyes and his heart clutched quietly in his hands. "I should have called," he said gently. "I'm sorry." Emily studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. He just fell asleep. Wilson stepped in cautiously. The apartment smelled of baby powder and fresh basil, homey, warm, lived in. It was smaller, yes, but it radiated something his mansion never could. She led him to the nursery. There, in a pale blue bassinet, lay Nathaniel, sleeping peacefully, his little fists curled under his chin. Wilson stared, his throat tightening. "He's gotten bigger," Emily nodded. "He likes soft music now. I play lullabies in the evenings." He smiled faintly. "You're doing well with him." "I'm trying." There was a pause. Wilson turned to her. "I've been thinking." Emily crossed her arms gently, unsure where this was going. "I never had a family," he said. "I told myself I didn't need one, that if I could provide everything, money, comfort, security, then I was doing enough. But I realize now I was trying to recreate my childhood, only with more polish." She watched him carefully. "I bought gifts," he continued. "I arranged teams of experts, nurses, caretakers. I planned everything, except how to truly see you. Choose you." Her expression flickered with emotion, but she didn't speak yet. "I understand now," Wilson said, voice low. "I made you feel like you didn't belong, like you were the shadow behind the spotlight. But Emily, that was never my intention. I was overwhelmed by being a father, and I lost sight of what made me one in the first place. You." Emily turned away briefly, wiping the corner of her eye. He stepped forward, but didn't touch her. "You once asked me why I chose you. The truth is, I saw light in you when I didn't think I deserved it. I wanted my child to come from someone good. But somewhere along the line, I forgot to treat you like the good woman you are." Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You made me feel replaceable." Wilson closed his eyes. "I know, and that is the deepest regret I carry." Silence passed between them like a wave. Then he spoke again. "I don't want this arrangement anymore. I don't want a contract or convenience or scheduled visits. I want to be in his life, not as a guest, as a father, and I want to be in your life if you'll let me." Emily looked at him, raw and vulnerable. "Are you saying this because you're lonely? Or because you finally realize you can't do this alone?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe both, but mostly because I miss home, and home is where both of you are." That night, Wilson stayed for dinner. Nothing fancy, just rice and peppered fish. Emily fed Nathaniel in his high chair while Wilson watched, sometimes jumping in to wipe milk from the baby's chin with a napkin. They spoke easily, as they hadn't in weeks, about sleep schedules, about her favorite childhood songs, about his embarrassing attempts to change diapers alone. And somewhere in that quiet evening, something began to mend. Not with fireworks, but with presence, with listening, with honesty, with effort. The rhythm between them became almost natural, soft, unspoken, but undeniably real. Wilson began showing up more frequently, not out of obligation but desire. He helped with diaper changes, grocery runs, even late-night baby rocking when Nathaniel refused to sleep. Emily didn't protest. She didn't ask questions. She simply allowed it. The door was no longer closed to him, and slowly he stepped through it, not as a guest, but as something else. They didn't speak of the past, not directly, not yet. But the space between them had changed. It wasn't heavy with tension anymore. It pulsed with something gentler, something waiting. One afternoon, Emily stood by the window folding tiny baby clothes, sunlight painting her skin gold. Wilson was seated on the floor beside Nathaniel's playmat, watching the baby roll onto his side, eyes wide with pride. "He's stronger," Wilson murmured. Emily smiled. "He's trying to crawl." "He's determined," he said, glancing up at her. "Like you." Their eyes held for a moment too long. She looked away quickly, her hands stalling on the fabric. "You've changed." He stood slowly, brushing off his jeans. "I've had reasons to." "Like him?" she asked, nodding toward the baby. He stepped closer. "Like you." The air shifted. She didn't reply, only turned her gaze back out the window. Wilson remained beside her, the silence between them filled with 1,000 words they hadn't yet said. He wanted to reach for her, but didn't. Not yet. That night, she invited him to stay for dinner. The nanny had gone home. The baby was asleep. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. They sat on the couch watching a nature documentary, a bowl of popcorn between them. Halfway through, Emily reached for the bowl at the same time he did. Their fingers brushed. She pulled her hand back quickly, laughing nervously. "Sorry." But he didn't laugh. "Emily," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" She looked at him. "Of course." "What would it take for you to believe that I love you?" Her breath caught. He hadn't said it like a man tossing out words. He said it like a man who had been holding them in for far too long. "You love me." "I do," he said gently. "I didn't know it at first. I mistook it for gratitude, then guilt, then admiration. But it's none of those things." She was speechless. "I love how you care, how you fight, how you protect Nathaniel, how you see me without fear. Wilson, I know I failed you before," he continued. "I let my fear speak louder than my heart. But I'm not afraid anymore. Not of commitment, not of being wrong, not of loving someone who deserves to be chosen every single day." She blinked quickly, tears blurring her vision. "I don't want to live in separate apartments. I don't want shared custody. I want a life with you, as partners, as a family." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small navy box. Her hands flew to her mouth. He dropped to one knee, not in a suit, not in front of the world, but in their home, where their real life had started. This time, he said, voice steady, "I'm not asking because I need a legal arrangement. I'm asking because I love you, and I can't imagine a future where you're not my wife in every way." He opened the box. Inside was a delicate, handcrafted diamond ring nestled in velvet, elegant, timeless, chosen with care. "Emily Okoye, will you marry me again? This time for real?" Her heart thundered in her chest. She could barely breathe. The tears slipped down her cheeks as she nodded, a choked whisper escaping her lips. "Yes." He stood slowly, and for the first time since their story began, he cupped her face with both hands, firm yet gentle, and leaned in. She didn't resist. Their lips met in a kiss that was slow, deep, and honest. It was the kiss of two people who had survived something unspeakable and still found their way back to tenderness. And as his hands sank into her curls and hers slid around his neck, the space between them ceased to exist. Healing did not happen all at once. It wasn't a wave that washed everything away or a sunrise that lit up the entire sky. Healing for Wilson and Emily was quieter than that, slower, more intentional. It happened in the small moments, the brushing of hands in the hallway, the comfortable silences over breakfast, the way they both reached for Nathaniel at the same time and laughed softly when their fingers touched. After Emily said yes to Wilson's heartfelt proposal, things did not magically fall into place, but they began to. He moved into the Lecky apartment first, not because of necessity, but because she asked him to. She wanted to ease into life as a couple, not in his sprawling mansion where power echoed through marble halls, but in the place they had created together, brick by brick, emotion by emotion. He agreed without protest. They rearranged the baby's room together. They repainted the kitchen walls one weekend, her in one of his oversized t-shirts, him playfully streaking her cheeks with soft gray paint. Nathaniel sat in his playpen, squealing in delight as his parents laughed more freely than they ever had before. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One morning, Wilson stood at the kitchen counter pouring coffee, while Emily nursed Nathaniel in the living room. The sunlight poured in through the windows, wrapping them both in gold. He watched her from across the room, something tender rising in his chest. She looked up and caught his stare. "What?" He shook his head, smiling. "Nothing. Just this. I didn't think I could ever have something like this." Emily arched a brow, setting Nathaniel down gently. "A kitchen?" He chuckled. "A home." She rose and walked toward him, barefoot, her robe tied loosely around her. "Well, welcome to one." He placed the coffee aside and reached for her hand. "You taught me what it means, not to decorate it, but to feel it." She leaned her head against his chest. "I used to be afraid I'd always feel like a visitor in your world." "You were my world," he whispered. "I just didn't know how to live in it with you. Now I do." They made a habit of walking together in the evenings after Nathaniel's bedtime. No security, no bodyguards. Just the two of them, side by side, strolling through the quiet neighborhood. Hands occasionally brushing, sometimes linking. It was during one of these walks that Emily opened up about her mother. "She died in my arms," she said softly. "The night before her surgery, she made me promise that I'd keep going, that I wouldn't let the pain change the way I love." Wilson squeezed her hand. "She would have liked you," she added. "Eventually." He smiled gently. "She sounds like someone I would have admired. Strong, protective." Emily nodded. "She would have also warned me not to fall for a man who never intended to stay." Wilson stopped walking. "I'm staying." "I know," she said, her eyes shining, "and that's why I'm finally letting go of the fear." But healing also meant confrontation. One evening, Emily found herself staring at Wilson across the dinner table. Nathaniel was asleep. The house was quiet. The candles flickered softly between them. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything. If I hadn't run, would you have ever told me the full truth? About the contract? The lies your lawyer fed me?" Wilson's jaw tensed slightly. He set his fork down. "I honestly don't know." Emily swallowed. "That scares me." "I was afraid then," he admitted, "of losing control, of being vulnerable, of watching someone walk away before I even had the chance to explain." She nodded. "And now? I'd rather lose control than lose you," he said. "Now I'd choose honesty, even if it hurts, even if it risks everything." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "That's all I ever wanted." In the weeks that followed, they grew closer. Wilson started working from home more often, not because he had to, but because he wanted to be present. Emily took up photography again, capturing tiny, beautiful moments with Nathaniel, and sometimes candid shots of Wilson laughing, unaware. She began calling him my husband in public. He introduced her proudly as my wife, and with every repetition, the past faded further into the background, still there, but no longer defining them. One night, as the rain fell gently against the windows and the scent of eucalyptus lingered in the room, Wilson stood by the crib watching Nathaniel sleep. Emily joined him, quietly, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "He's so peaceful," she whispered. "So are you," he said. She rested her head against his back. "I used to think peace would only come after I left you." Wilson turned, holding her face in his hands. "And now? Now I know," she whispered. "It only came when I let myself love you." They didn't speak after that. There was nothing left to prove. Only everything left to cherish. Wilson Andrews had never believed in weddings, or anniversaries, or public declarations of love. He had always seen them as performance, displays for others, rarely rooted in truth. His world was full of people who wore commitment like fashion, easily adorned, easily discarded. He had spent most of his adult life avoiding such illusions. But that was before Emily. Now, as he stood in front of a grand ballroom mirror adjusting his black tuxedo, his fingers tightening the bow tie that somehow still felt too formal, he realized something had changed. He wasn't afraid of being seen anymore, because he was no longer pretending. The event was a gala hosted by one of the most powerful luxury syndicates in Africa, an elite circle Wilson had long been a part of. This year, he was not only a guest of honor, but also presenting a new charitable initiative under his name. It was meant to be a business night, strategic, sophisticated. But all anyone could talk about was the woman walking into the room at his side. Emily. She wore a satin emerald gown that hugged her curves in all the right places, her skin radiant, her presence commanding without effort. Her natural curls were swept back into a soft, elegant bun, and her diamond earrings, gifts from Wilson, sparkled with subtle defiance. She didn't cling to him. She didn't need to. They walked side by side, equals, a woman and a man who had walked through fire and still emerged hand in hand. Every camera in the room turned. Every whispered conversation paused. The billionaire bachelor, the once ruthless lone wolf of Lagos, had brought his wife, and it wasn't just a title anymore. "Is this okay?" she whispered as they stood near the banquet entrance, fingers loosely interlaced. Wilson glanced at her. "You mean being here?" She nodded, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. He leaned closer, his voice low but firm. "You make everything okay." She smiled, genuine, soft, and he felt something shift in his chest again. He had never been this calm in a crowd, never felt so certain of anything in public. Throughout the evening, guests approached them. Some congratulated, others gawked. A few whispered to Wilson privately, asking how he'd managed to settle down. One of his competitors even joked, "So the lion finally chose to build a den." Wilson smiled politely at all of them. But every time he looked at Emily from across the room, standing by the dessert table, gently touching her necklace as she laughed at something Evelyn said, he realized what he had truly built. A home. Later, during the final speech of the evening, Wilson stood at the podium. His voice echoed across the crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. "I was once told," he began, "that building wealth was about strategy, silence, and survival. And for years I believed that." He paused, gaze finding Emily at their table. "But then I met someone who reminded me that the true measure of legacy isn't just power or profit. It's who you become when you stop surviving and start living." The crowd was hushed. She didn't come from my world. She didn't want anything from me. But she gave me everything I didn't know I was missing. And tonight, for the first time, I want to publicly say, I didn't just find success in business. I found it in love. He stepped away to a wave of applause. Emily's eyes were filled with tears. And for the first time, the world saw not Wilson Andrews, the mogul, but Wilson Andrews, the man who loved his wife. They didn't say much on the drive home. The silence between them was electric, full of everything that had not yet been spoken. Wilson's hand rested on her thigh as the car sped through the quiet streets of Banana Island. His thumb traced slow, firm circles against the silk of her gown. Emily leaned her head back, her pulse loud in her ears. She could feel him watching her, not possessively, not out of habit, but with reverence. By the time they walked into the house, the air between them was too charged to ignore. She turned toward him near the staircase. "You were incredible tonight." Wilson stepped closer. "You were the reason." Their eyes locked, and in the next second, he pulled her close and kissed her, deeply, hungrily, yet with aching tenderness. Her hands found his jacket lapels, and his arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her as he carried her toward the bedroom. This wasn't the man who once built walls. This was the man who had broken them down for her. They made love slowly at first, his hands tracing every inch of her, as if memorizing what peace felt like. Her sighs were soft, her responses vulnerable, her body opening to him not as an obligation, but as a choice. And then, everything deepened. The calm turned into fire. The control melted. It was not just need, it was years of longing, of pain, of trying to say through touch what had been too hard to say with words. He worshipped her. She met him with equal hunger. And when they finally collapsed into each other, breathless and silent, there was no space left between them. Only warmth. Only belonging. Only love. Later, as they lay tangled in silk sheets, her head on his chest and his fingers drawing circles on her back, he whispered the truth that had been forming in him for months. "I thought marriage was a trap, a cage. But this, being yours, loving you like this, it's the most freeing thing I've ever known." She smiled softly, kissed his shoulder, and whispered back, "And it's only the beginning." 3 weeks after the gala, the Andrews family held a private naming ceremony, an intimate affair that, despite its simplicity, carried the weight of generations. Wilson had chosen to do it differently. No ballroom, no press, no cameras. Just family, close friends, and those who mattered. The garden behind their Banana Island home was transformed into a serene space. White drapes fluttering in the breeze, soft music from a live acoustic band, and long tables adorned with fresh roses and candles. Emily stood holding Nathaniel, who was now 3 months old, nestled against her chest in a silk wrap. She wore a flowing ivory dress with delicate lace at the sleeves, her skin glowing, her hair pinned up with gold pins Wilson had gifted her that morning. She felt peace, real peace. It was a quiet, steady kind, the kind that comes when you've survived storms and made it to the shore with love still intact. When Wilson stepped onto the small podium to speak, his voice was steady, but his eyes were shining. "I was never supposed to be a father," he said plainly. "Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't believe I could give what a child truly needs: presence, safety, peace." He looked toward Emily and something in him softened. "But this boy changed me, and the woman who gave him to me, who chose to stay despite everything, changed me even more." He turned back to the guests. "Today I give him my name, not because it makes him worthy, but because it's my honor to pass it down." He walked to Emily, gently took Nathaniel into his arms, and held him up. "Nathaniel Chidi Andrews," he said aloud, "you are my son, my heir, and you will never question how loved you are." The guests clapped quietly. There were tears, smiles, warmth. But just as the music resumed and champagne began to flow, a figure appeared at the gate, uninvited but known. His name was Dominic Andrews, Wilson's older half-brother. A man who had once ruled their father's attention, only to abandon the family empire for a reckless life abroad. He had not been seen in nearly 7 years, not since their father's funeral. Tall, sharply dressed in a cream linen suit, Dominic strolled into the ceremony with the ease of someone who didn't need permission. Guests turned, whispers began. Emily, holding Nathaniel again, tensed immediately. Wilson's jaw tightened, his calm nearly cracked. "Dom," he said, stepping forward, "why are you here?" Dominic smirked. "Is that how you greet family now? No hug, no toast?" "This is not the place, but it is the moment," Dominic said, looking at Emily. "So this is the woman? The one who tamed Lagos's lion?" Wilson stepped slightly in front of her. Watch your words, Dominic chuckled. Relax, brother. I came to say congratulations and to ask one question. Everyone was watching now. Evelyn, the guests, even the staff. Dominic turned toward the baby and said with a pointed smile, "Does he carry the name because you love him or because you need someone to control one day?" A quiet gasp rippled through the air. Wilson's expression didn't change, but Emily's voice cut through the silence. He carries the name because he was claimed, with love, not power. Dominic looked at her, impressed. Fiery. "She's my wife," Wilson said firmly. "Not another woman you can insult." There was a long pause before Dominic raised his hands. "Fine, I've said my piece." He turned to walk away, then paused at the edge of the crowd. "Just be careful, Wilson. Love makes men foolish. Don't forget, we come from a man who believed in bloodlines more than hearts." Wilson stared after him for a moment, then turned back to his wife and child. Later that night, after the guests had left and Nathaniel was asleep in his crib, Wilson sat on the edge of their bed, his elbows resting on his knees. Emily came out of the bathroom, her robe tied loosely, her eyes searching his face. "You're quiet." "I knew he'd show up eventually," Wilson muttered. "I just didn't expect it today." Emily sat beside him. "Do you think he's right? That you gave Nathaniel the name because of legacy?" He turned to her quickly. "No, I gave him my name because I want him to know who he is, where he comes from, and that he never has to prove his worth the way I did." She nodded, letting the silence sit between them for a beat. "Today was beautiful," she said, "and hard. But you handled it." Wilson reached for her hand. "I don't care what Dom thinks," he said. "This family, you, Nathaniel, is my heart, and there's nothing more sacred than that." She looked into his eyes and saw the sincerity that had grown deeper each day since he chose her fully. Then she smiled. "I believe you." He kissed her palm. "Thank you," he whispered, "for choosing to stay, for teaching me what home really means." They laid down together, not in passion this time, but in peace, in stillness, in love that had been tested and found real. The garden was still the same, bigger now, with more roses and a curved bench under the almond tree where sunlight filtered through in soft golden ribbons. The laughter of a child echoed across the lawn, loud, bright, and free. Emily sat on the edge of the stone bench, a straw hat on her head, a book resting in her lap. She had grown more graceful with time, her beauty ripened by motherhood, wisdom, and deep contentment. Her eyes, once filled with guarded hope, now sparkled with the quiet confidence of a woman who had chosen love and been loved in return. From a distance, she watched her son sprint across the yard with Wilson chasing behind him, laughing harder than he had in years. "Nathaniel Chidi Andrews," Wilson called out playfully. "Drop that football and come back here now." The boy, now 6 years old, paused dramatically, grinning over his shoulder. He had Wilson's bold smile and Emily's gentle eyes. "Catch me first, Daddy." Wilson made a show of pretending to fall, groaning. "This is what I get for giving you all those vitamins." Emily chuckled softly and shook her head. This was their world now. Not built by money, though they had plenty. Not structured by contracts, though they had once been bound by one. But crafted by daily choosing. Choosing each other, choosing healing, choosing family. Later that evening, after Nathaniel was tucked in with his favorite bedtime story, the one Wilson insisted on reading every single night, Emily stood by the window overlooking the garden, now bathed in moonlight. Wilson came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "He asked today why he doesn't have a baby sister," Emily said softly, smiling. Wilson chuckled against her neck. "I told him it's because Daddy's still recovering from the first one." Emily laughed. "He's already plotting her name." He turned her around gently to face him. "Let's give him one then." Her breath caught. "Are you serious?" He nodded. "I don't want just a son. I want a family, a noisy, messy, beautiful one." With you. She leaned into him. We already have a beautiful one. He kissed her forehead. Then let's make it even more beautiful. Years ago, Wilson had been a man haunted by shadows. His childhood, his fears, his mistakes. Now he was a man at peace. Not because life had been perfect, but because love had been patient. The world still saw him as powerful, but only Emily saw him as whole. And as they stood there in the quiet of their home, arms around each other, hearts aligned, the past no longer held power over them. They had turned pain into purpose, distance into closeness, and strangers into soulmates. Together. Forever. Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.